Morning. It is good to see you all here today. I want to echo what Alyssa said. Finding a group and sharing your life with them is one of the best things that you can do. It's great for your mental health. It's great for your emotional health. It's great for your relational health, and it's especially great for your spiritual health. So if you're not in a group, as we get ready to launch new groups this fall, I hope you'll consider jumping in and being a part of one of those. We are well into our study of the book of Romans now, and we're coming up on Romans chapter 6 today. And here in Romans 6, Paul is going to do something a little different than what he's been doing. And so to make sure we're set to go, I want to take just a minute and review where we've been. So if we recap Romans 1 through 5, here's what we've discovered in Romans so far. First of all, that God's wrath is revealed against sin. And we saw this in chapters 1 and 2, that because humanity has rejected God, because we've chosen to worship creation instead of the Creator, because we know the truth but we've suppressed it, God's wrath is revealed against us. Now, this is not an anger, bitter, vengeful wrath. This is a merciful wrath designed to get our attention and turn us back to Him so that we might repent and return to Him. Now, it's not just a global, large-scale issue, though. It's a personal issue for every one of us. Because as we learned in Romans 3, all have sinned. That means every single one of us has violated God's law, has violated our conscience, has done things that we know to be wrong, and because all have sinned, therefore, all deserve death. And death goes beyond just physical death at the end of our life here. It's a spiritual, eternal death, meaning separation from God for all of eternity. And all of us deserve that because of our sin. Fortunately, there's good news. And the good news is that God justifies sinners through Jesus. Remember, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection was done for us. He was willing to do for us what we couldn't do. He went to the cross, and on the cross, He took upon Himself all of our sin. So that if we will believe in Him, God will justify us, which means simply that God chooses to see us just as if we'd never sinned. Now, this justification cannot be earned. It's not something that we can do enough and God will give it to us. We don't get to say, well, I did this, this, and this, therefore, God, you owe me this. It doesn't work that way. Rather, it's through grace, and grace only that God justifies us when we believe. And that kind of brings us up to Romans chapter 6. So in Romans chapter 6, Paul is going to pause for just a second, and he's going to ask two questions. And these are kind of like hypothetical questions that he imagines maybe people might be thinking about or they might ask. And so he's just going to ask the question and give us the answer all at once. And this week we'll look at one question, and next week we'll look at chapter 7 that has another question. This week our question is this: if I stand in grace, can I do whatever I want? Right? If God just is going to give me grace and give me grace and give me grace, doesn't that mean I can do whatever I want? The question next week that we'll come to in chapter 7 is, now that I'm saved, do I still need to obey the law? So they're kind of similar questions. But this week we're going to ask this question that Paul asks, hey, if I stand in grace, doesn't that mean that I can just do anything I want? Let's look at it in chapter 6. Verse 1, he says, what shall we say then? So after everything we've discussed through these first 5 chapters, what shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? Now understand what Paul is saying. Grace is good, right? We all want to receive the grace of God. And if God gives us grace when we sin, well then doesn't it make sense that we should sin more? Because if we sin more, then we get more grace. It's like, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way. I'm going to go out and do whatever I want, right? Now, instinctively, we know this isn't wrong, right? We're like, yeah, I'm not sure that's exactly how we ought to live. And maybe we can understand that a little bit better if we put it in the context of a marriage, right? Because marriage is a place where we give grace to each other, right? We give grace to our spouses. That's how it works. So imagine a man and a woman get married, and they have their wedding, and it's beautiful. They say their vows, till death do us part. They put rings on each other's fingers. You may kiss the bride. It's all great. And they get home that night, and the husband says to himself, she said, till death do us part. And she put that ring on her finger, so that means I can do whatever I want. right? I can run around. Instead of being a great husband and providing and being present and listening and engaging in the relationship, I'm just going to go downstairs and build a massive man cave, and I'm going to have thousands of dollars of video games and TVs, and I'm going to have all my friends over all the time. I'm never going to pay attention to my wife. I am going to do whatever I want to do when I want to do it. I'm going to go golfing every day of the week, and at night I'm just going to watch football, and I'm not going to do anything else. And we would say, you're doing it wrong. You're being a bad husband. That's not what you signed up for. And beyond that, we would begin to question whether he even really meant his vows, right? And we would certainly question whether or not he actually loves his wife, because the reality is, when you get married, something changes. When you get married, you leave the old life behind and you begin a new life. The two become one. Before marriage, both of you were living separate lives. After marriage, together, you're living a brand new life. This is what Paul's answer is, right? If we ask the question, well, if Jesus is just going to give me grace, can't I sin even more? Paul answers by saying this, by no means, right? That's no. No, it doesn't work that way. How can we, who died to sin, still live in it? So in a marriage, I die to my singleness. I leave it behind. And if I die to it, how can I still live there? That's what he's saying. Do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Just as getting married changes everything, when you decide to follow Jesus, everything about your life changes, because Jesus changes everything. You see, following Jesus is not just like a name change or a religion change. Like before that, I wasn't a Christian, but now I call myself a Christian. It is that, but it's more than that. And following Jesus isn't just like a status change, right? Like my eternal status has changed. Before Jesus, I was going to hell, and now I'm going to heaven. It is that, but it's more than that. Because following Jesus, it's a lifestyle change. It's an everything change. In fact, just like with the husband, his behavior might lead us to ask some questions. With Jesus, if everything about your life hasn't changed, then the question is, has Jesus changed anything? Because when we fully give our lives to him, everything about us changes. And Paul is going to use two pictures in Romans 6 to help us understand this. Okay, the first picture is the picture of baptism. This is what he says in verse 4. We were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. So whenever somebody gets baptized, it is a picture that they have chosen to attach their life to Jesus, right? I'm aligning myself with Jesus. And the two big pictures are, we get buried, so we go under the water. That means I have aligned myself with Jesus' death. And then the second picture is the picture of resurrection. When I come up out of the water, I'm now aligned with Jesus' resurrection. Now, being aligned with Jesus' resurrection is awesome. That's the part we like. Everything's new. All of my guilt, my shame, my despair, my regret, that's all gone. Everything is new. I have a new life to live. I'm excited. This is great. We love being connected to Jesus in his resurrection. But do you understand that you cannot join Jesus in his resurrection if you don't first join him in his death? That's what Paul is saying here. Then before you get the resurrection, you have to die to something. And what Paul is saying is we die to the old way. So before I can experience the new life that Jesus offers, I have to die to the old life that I was living. Look what he says in verse 11. He says, so you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Okay, this is what's at the core of our transformation, is that we are dead to sin and alive to Jesus. But what Paul says here is you must consider yourself this way. And that means what? It means to think about yourself this way. Maybe you haven't ever thought about thinking about yourself this way. Okay? Because we like to think about ourselves. In fact, all of us think about ourselves all the time. That's what it means to be human, right? I think about myself all the time. But usually when I'm thinking about myself, it's not on this deep of a level. Usually when I'm thinking about myself, it's things like, I wonder what I'm going to wear today. Does this shirt make me look fat? Right? Is my hair okay? Am I losing some of my hair? There's a lot more gray in my hair. There's a lot more gray in my beard. I am really getting old. What should I do about my pants today? A lot of you don't understand this battle, right? Like every day I have to decide what to do with my pants. Am I going to roll them or am I just going to let them go because they never fit quite right? You see, the reality is that God made me and right? Now, there are some people who are just and they're okay. And there are some people who are but they're also and so their pants fit fine. But me, if I find pants that fit me this way, they don't fit me this way. Right? And so these are the things I think about. It's not very deep and spiritual, is it? And you're probably the same way. Sometimes we think about what other people are thinking about. Like, I wonder what they're thinking about me right now. I wonder if they're thinking about me at all. I wonder if they like me. I wonder if they don't like me. I wonder if they're impressed by me. I wonder if they want to be my friend. I wonder if they hate me. I wonder what I did to them, right? These are all the things that we think all the time about what other people think about us. And Paul is saying sometimes take time to think more deeply about yourself. Think more deeply about who God has made you in Christ. Like when you get up in the morning, you probably don't start your morning by thinking, I am dead to sin and alive to Christ. How is that going to impact my day? Maybe you should. Maybe that would help. Most of us, we get up in the morning and we think, can I hit the snooze one more time? Right? What am I going to have for breakfast? Is there any more bacon left in the refrigerator? Right? What's on my schedule for today? What social media do I imagine this. Imagine if as you're going through your day, instead of in those pauses that you have, pulling out your phone and immediately starting to scroll, you just took the minute and said, you know what, I'm just going to take some time and think. I'm just going to take some time to consider what God has done in my life. To think about what it means for me to be dead to sin and alive in Christ. Or maybe in those moments when you sense temptation starting to come your way, because all of us know when it's starting to come. Like there are places you can be in, there are conversations you can be a part of, right? There are influences that start to hit you, and you know those are the times when temptation starts coming my way. What if in those times you started to think about yourself and said, you know what, I am dead to sin, and I am alive in Christ. That's what Paul is saying to us. Consider yourself. Think about yourself as a different person, a changed person. The old is gone and the new is open to be lived, but I have to remember I killed the old. He gives some more practical advice in the next verse. Verse 12, he says, let not sin, therefore, reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions. So reign is a royalty word, right? We don't use this word very often because in America we don't have a king. England tried to make us drink their tea, and we said, no, we like coffee, and so we had a big revolution about that, right? We said, we don't want a king anymore, something like that. You see, if you understand how a king or a queen works, it's one thing to say, I'm loyal to the king. That's fine, right? But it's another thing when the king says to you, you have to do this, whether or not you'll obey. And if you obey the king, then the king reigns over you. And if you disobey the king, then you're in rebellion against the king. And this is what Paul is saying. Rebel against sin. Don't let sin be your king. Those times in your life when sin comes your way, sin comes knocking on your mind's door and says, you should do this. Paul says, don't let it reign. Don't make sin the king of your life. Rebel against it. And he goes on. He says, don't let it reign. Do not, this is verse 13, do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. All right, couple key words here. First, he says you have to present yourself. Just hold that in the side of your mind for a second. We'll come back to it in a few verses. But he says present your members. And really what he's saying is yourself. It's another word for your body. And so he's talking about your actions, your words, your attitudes, the way you live. And he's saying, present the way you live as if it is an instrument. An instrument that can either be used for righteousness or for unrighteousness. Now, let's talk about instruments just for a second. When you hear instrument, you might think of like tools, right? The tools are different kinds of instruments. Or you might think of like the instruments that you play, like a horn or something like that. Either one actually works for this, okay? Well, what Paul is saying is an instrument is useless if it's on its own, okay? An instrument that's just lying there, it's useless. It's no good to anyone. An instrument in the wrong hands is dangerous, but an instrument in the hands of a master is powerful. Think about surgery for a second. Okay, whenever you go in for surgery, the surgeon has instruments that they are going to use. And these instruments are what will determine whether or not the surgery goes well. And in any operation, you might have anywhere from 20 to 50 different instruments that are used. Some are long, some are short, some are sharp, some are dull. They're all different kinds of instruments. Now, do you understand that as long as those instruments remain on the table, they do no good to anyone, right? Until someone picks up those instruments, they're not good for anyone. And if the wrong person uses the instruments, great harm can be done. If you go in for surgery, like just something simple, like you have to have your appendix out, and right before you go under, you see that I'm the one doing the surgery, you're going to be very nervous. And if you're not, you've had too many drugs. Because in my hands, those instruments are going to be very dangerous. I don't know where to cut. I don't know what to cut. I don't know which instrument to cut with. I mean, there's a whole bunch of sharp ones here. I'll just grab one, right? And so you can see that in the wrong hands, these instruments can be very dangerous and can do great harm. Maybe not even to you. I might cut my own finger off because I don't know what I'm doing. However, in the hands of a master, these instruments can be very powerful. Right? When the surgeon comes in, the surgeon knows every instrument, knows exactly which one to use, how to use it, where to use it, why to use it. And in the hands of a master, great benefit can happen. This is what Paul is saying to you. So look, your body, your life, the way you live is an instrument. And if you use your instrument to serve the wrong master, if you use your instrument the old way, great harm will be done. But if you use your instrument for righteousness, if you put your life into the hands of the master, he can do amazing things through you. But in order to put your life in the hands of the master, you have to let go of your life. Jesus talked about this. Back in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus said this, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." Now, Jesus is not saying, literally, I want you to find a cross and carry it somewhere and then nail yourself to it and be crucified. That's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is the exact same thing that Paul said. You have to die to something. You have to die to the old way of living. You cannot put your life in my hands until you let go of your life. That's what Jesus was saying, and that's what Paul is saying. Now, Paul has a second picture to help us understand this. So let's go back to Romans 6 and go on here. Verse 15, Paul says, "What then?" So he's kind of using the same question that he already asked. "What then? Are we to sin because we are not under law but under grace?" So he's still saying, look, so what does this look like? Is it okay for a Christian, is it okay for a follower of Jesus to keep on sinning? Is that all right? And again, he says, by no means. No, of course not. We know this. This is obvious. "Do you not know that if you present," there's that word again, "if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one of whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness." All right, let's take a quick time out here. Because anytime we find in the Bible, Paul does this a lot, talking about slavery, there are those who's like, see, the Bible condones slavery. The Bible speaks positively about slavery. And now there have been people in history who have tried to use the Bible to condone slavery. And they were wrong, and that was sinful, and it's the worst kind of misinterpreting the Bible. Because from the very beginning to the very end, the Bible is crystal clear on this topic. It is never okay for one person to steal another person and own them. Ever, right? The Bible's crystal clear on this. That's not what Paul is talking about here, right? Paul is using this as a picture. But beyond that, understand, Paul here is using Roman slavery as a picture. What we think about when we think about slavery is something that came much later. It's the Western brand of slavery, which was much worse. In the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century, when Europe and in America, people did literally steal people and own them and abuse them, the most sinful and horrific crime, right? That's not what Paul is talking about. Now, in Roman slavery, there were times when people did this. Like someone who was in a war, they captured someone in a war, they might make them their slave. That's wrong. The Bible condemns it. There were times when maybe a criminal got caught and was put into slavery for that. But there was also a situation in Rome where a person could choose to be a slave, which sounds really odd to us. But why would someone do that? Well, sometimes they might choose to be a slave because they were deep in debt. They were so far in debt they were never going to get out, and so they might become a slave of the person they were indebted to and actually have an agreement that I'm going to be your slave for this amount of time and I'll work off my debt that way. Another reason someone might choose to be a slave in ancient Rome was because they couldn't provide for themselves or they couldn't protect themselves. Right? Those were difficult times. And if you were a person who you couldn't provide for yourself or you couldn't protect yourself, you might actually offer yourself up as a slave to someone who could provide for you and someone who could protect you. That's what Paul is talking about here. And the reason I say that's what he's talking about is because you have to look at the language he uses. He says, do you not know that if you present yourself to anyone as an obedient slave? He's saying, if you choose to offer yourself as a slave, that's what he's talking about here, all right? So let's summarize this so we understand what he means, all right? This kind of slavery that Paul's talking about, three things. Number one, it's a break from the past. It's a person who says, the way I've been living is no longer how I'm going to live. Now, they're saying, I've been free up to this point, but it's not gone so well for me. I'm deeply in debt. I can't provide for myself. I need protection. It's not working. I'm leaving that. I'm starting a new life. Secondly, it's a transfer of responsibility. This is really important because when I offer myself as a slave to someone else, they are now responsible for me. Like up to this point in my life, I've been responsible for me. Again, it hasn't worked out really well. And so now I'm offering myself to someone else, and they will now be responsible for me. And then thirdly, it's a choice to submit. It's not being forced upon me. I'm choosing to do this. I'm choosing to submit to my new master. Why? In exchange for provision and protection. All right? So with that in mind, look at what Paul says, verse 19. He says, "For just as you once presented your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness, leading to sanctification." So what Paul's saying is, look, your former life, you were a slave of sin. You presented yourself, you chose to submit to sin. When temptation came along and said, do this, you said, okay. And what he says is that leads somewhere. So if you present yourself as a slave to sin, that leads to immorality and lawlessness, which leads to more lawlessness. And so you find yourself in this place way outside the will of God and running further and further from him because you're choosing to serve the wrong master. Now, Paul says, you must choose to submit yourself to a new master. Make a break from the past. Allow God to be responsible for you. Choose to submit to him, and when he does that, if you choose to submit yourself to the right master, that leads to righteousness, which leads to sanctification. And sanctification is the process by which the Spirit of God changes us from the inside out so our lives match what God has created us to be. And what Paul says is when you choose to serve the right master, this is what happens. Now again, these are Jesus ideas that Paul is unpacking. Right, go back to Matthew chapter 6. This is in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus says this, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, why did Jesus choose to bring money into this? Right? We understand the concept. You can't serve two masters. You can't serve the old master and the new master. Right? You have to pick and choose. But why did Jesus choose to make it money? Couldn't he just as easily have said, you cannot serve God and your passion? Well, he could have, for sure, because often our human passion leads us away from God. And when we're following our human passions, that will take us away from him. So we can't serve God in our passion, but that's not what Jesus said. Couldn't Jesus have said, you cannot serve God and popularity? Well, of course he could have said that too, because if we chase after the acceptance and approval of the world, we will most likely be running away from the acceptance and the approval of God, because God's standards are very different than the world's standards. What God says is good is very different than what the world says is good. So Jesus easily could have said, you cannot serve God and popularity, and he would have been right. But that's not what he said. Why did he say you can't serve God and money? Jesus understood that just as was true then is true now, that we as humans have a really unique relationship with money, right? We really depend on money. If you're a person who doesn't have enough, then you're stressed and you're anxious and you're always trying to figure out, what do I need to do? What do I need to change? How do I need to live so I can have more? And if you're a person who has enough, you're always stressed and you're always anxious and you're always asking yourself, what do I need to change so I can hold on to what I've got? And very often, the people who don't have enough are willing to do things they shouldn't do in order to get more, and the people who do have enough are willing to do things they shouldn't do to hold on to what they've got. And this has been true for all of eternity, right? Because people have an odd relationship with money. And so Jesus is reminding us that you cannot serve money and God. This is another way to think about it, all right? If you present yourself as a slave, to present yourself as a slave is to commit yourself to the one, to be loyal to the one on whom you depend for protection and provision. And the reality is, if we're honest with ourselves, we very often depend on money for protection and provision. What do you need for provision? I need food. I got to get the groceries. I got to go to a restaurant sometimes. I need food. Well, how am I going to get groceries? I have to have money. I need a roof over my head. Well, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to pay the utilities? I need money. I need a car to get from place to place, and I need gas so that my car will run. Well, how am I going to get a car? How am I going to get gas? I need money. And so it's very easy for us to get caught up in this mindset that I have to provide for myself by getting more money, because if I don't have money, I won't have what I need. And what I end up doing is I end up serving the money instead of serving the one who gave me the money. Because it's God that makes it possible for me to work for my money. It's God who opens some doors and closes other doors. It's God who makes sure that I have everything I need, including enough money that I need. But sometimes I lose sight of that and I serve the money instead of serving the one behind the money. Because we serve the one that we think will provide for us. And we serve the one that we think will protect us. And let's be honest, a lot of times it's easy for us to think it's my money that protects me. It's my money that keeps me safe, right? I have more money, I buy more guns. I get locks for my house, right? I have a security system in my house. How did I get that? I have money. Money keeps me safe. It's money that makes me secure, right? My 401k, that's my security. It's money that makes me comfortable. How am I going to get a new couch? How am I going to get a nicer bed, a better mattress, a better pillow? It's money that brings me pleasure, right? I'm going to get a faster car. I'm going to go get tickets to this, tickets to that. I'm going to get a boat, whatever it may be. And I'm not saying any of this stuff is bad. What I'm saying is if you're depending on money to keep you safe and secure and comfortable and happy, then you are serving money, not God. Now here's a really simple, little tiny twist in your thinking that can help keep you from serving money instead of serving God. Here it is, right? Stop thinking about your money as being the thing that provides for you and protects you, and start asking yourself, how can I use my money to serve God? That's it. How can I use my money to serve God? As long as money is what provides for you, you will serve it. As long as money is what protects you, you will serve it. But when money becomes an instrument that you can place in the hands of the master for righteousness, now you're serving God instead of money. Money's not bad. Money can be used to do great good because an instrument in the hands of the master can do great good. Now listen, I know that what Jesus is calling us to in these verses and what Paul is talking to us in these verses, this is hard. It is not easy to die to yourself. It is not easy to die to sin. It is not easy to die to the old life. It is difficult. When Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me, if anybody wants to follow me, they have to lose their life. He knew that that wasn't easy. That's why very few people took him up on it. It's hard. But also, I know that you're willing to do hard things. All of us are willing to do hard things. Now we have different motivations that help us to do that, right? There are some people who they're motivated by I need the rush of adrenaline. So I'm going to climb a mountain or scale a cliff or ride a bike off something or jump out of a perfectly good airplane, whatever it might be, right? I want that adrenaline rush, so I'm going to do a hard thing. Some people are like, well, I just need to prove myself. I need to prove myself to someone else. I need to prove myself to myself. I need to prove that someone else is wrong, whatever it might be. I'm willing to do a hard thing if it means that will prove myself. So, some people, you're just motivated by the right thing. You're like, if it's the right thing, I'll do it. Right? If it's the wrong thing, I won't. You have this really incredibly black and white moral compass, and so you're like, yeah, I'll do it hard. I know it's hard, but it's right, so I'm going to do it. And that's awesome. Some of you are motivated to do hard things because you know what the benefits are. Right? I'm going to hit the gym every day. I'm going to be on the weight machine every day. I'm going to eat right because I want my body to be in the perfect shape, and I know what the benefits of hard work are. I want to get this degree, and so I'm going to study hard. I'm going to give up other things so I can pursue this dream. I know it's going to be hard, but I know what the benefits are, so I'm willing to do hard things because I know the benefits. Sometimes we're motivated to do hard things out of gratitude and love. Like there's somebody in our life who's done something amazing for us, and so we want to do something amazing for them. There's somebody in our life who has shown us incredible love, and so we want to show them incredible love. And sometimes that's hard. It's not always easy. But out of gratitude and love, we want to do that difficult thing. Right? I don't know what motivates you. But probably one of those, that's me. That's what motivates me to do hard things. So my question for you this morning is, how can you motivate yourself to do the hard thing of dying to yourself? Maybe you just need to ask yourself, is it the right thing to do? It is. Do it. Right? If that's you, you're good to go. For some of you, you need to think about what's the benefit of this? Well, man, the benefit of dying to the old way and living the new way is a life of hope and joy and peace and contentment. The kind that can't come from serving the world or serving yourself or serving money. You know what the biggest problem with serving money is? You are well aware that you could lose it at any moment. And so no matter how much you have, there is always that stress and that anxiety in the back of your mind that I might lose this because I don't have full control over it. But if you're serving God, He will never leave you or forsake you. He will always be there for you. He will always provide. So for some of you, the question is, well, what's the benefit? The benefit is serving a master who will never leave you. The benefit is serving a master who will bring you peace and hope and joy, who will wipe away your stress and anxiety if you will let him. And maybe some of you you're that kind of person who I serve out of gratitude, I serve out of love. And maybe you're struggling a little bit this morning to figure out why don't I have more gratitude towards God? Why don't I feel more love in my heart towards God? And I would suggest it's because you don't think about it enough. You don't consider enough what he's done for you. The reality is, the more that I think about what God has done for me, the more gratitude fills my heart. The more I love him and the more I want to serve him. When I think more about how he was willing to die in my place, how he was willing to rescue me from my past, how he was willing to eliminate my guilt and my shame and my despair and my regret, and how Jesus was willing to do all of that for me when I could never do it for myself. When I think about the fact that he has secured eternity for me, and I do not need to fear death, I do not need to fear suffering because of what he's done. Now, as I think about that, my heart is full of gratitude and love, and it becomes so much easier to serve him and to follow him. You know, part of the problem for us is sometimes we forget that God is our king, and we just want him to be our insurance agent. You know, we most of us have an insurance agent, right? Whether it's car or health or life or, you know, home or whatever it might be. I'm going to guess that whoever your insurance agent is, you don't call them every day. Like, you don't get on the phone, hey, how's it going today? Anything I can do? I just want to make sure my policy is good. You don't. You know what you do? You write a check once a month. That's it. You write your check once a month, and you're like, okay, I'm good, I'm insured, I'm good to go. If something bad happens, the insurance will kick in, I'm okay. And this is how we treat God sometimes. It's like, okay, I've got my fire insurance, right? I'm saved, I'm not going to hell, I'm going to heaven, everything's good. Now I got to write my check every month, which for most of us means I got to go to church once a week, or every 2 weeks, or every month. Or some of you, I haven't seen you for 6 months, so it's once every 6 months. Right? And that's how I pay my insurance agent. So I'm going to go to church every week, and that's what I got to do, and God's going to insure me, and we're good to go, and nothing else about my life changes. I want to be honest with you. Over the course of my life, I've had a lot of insurance agents. Some are good, some are bad. None of them have radically changed my life. I just write them a check every month. Why would I treat God that way? God is my king. He is my master. He has changed me. He's changed the trajectory of my life. He does not want me to write him a check once a month and then ignore him the rest of the time. He wants all of me. He wants all of you. So let me leave you this morning with 2 questions to help you figure out what it means for you to make God your king instead of your insurance agent. All right, here's question number 1 is this. What do you need to leave in the grave? Right? You died with Jesus. You were buried with him. And the thing about being buried with Jesus means that when he comes up out of the grave, he leaves sin behind. So if you come out of the grave with him, you are leaving your sin behind. I'm guessing there is something for all of us that we need to let go of today. There's something that you need to let go of today. Maybe it's a habit that you know it's wrong, you know it's not good for you, you know it's not what God wants, and you keep going back to it and keep going back to it and keep going back to it. And God is saying, look, if you died to your old life, then you need to let go of that habit. Maybe it's an attitude that you have. Maybe it's someone from your past that has hurt you, and you've been holding on to that grudge, and it's only making you bitter. What you need to do today is you need to leave that grudge in the grave. What do you need to leave in the grave? Second question is this. What do you need to stop serving? I mean, we understand the concept, right? I can't serve God in anything else. But this morning, I want you to think about what it is that you've been serving. If you think about it in terms of appetite, that can be helpful. We all have appetites for different things, not just food. But the thing about an appetite is the more I feed it, the more it grows. Right? The more I eat bacon, the more I like bacon. But if I starve the appetite, it goes away. And eventually, if I starve an appetite, that appetite will even change to something different. And when I think about who it is that I serve or what it is that I serve, think about that as an appetite. What do you have an appetite for in life? Maybe it is an appetite for money. Maybe it's an appetite for stuff. Maybe it's an appetite for food. Maybe it's an appetite for popularity or for being liked or accepted. Maybe your appetite is for something else. You know what your appetites are for, and you know which of those appetites are leading you away from God, and you're serving the wrong master. And today is the day when you say, I'm going to start starving that appetite. I'm going to stop feeding that appetite, and I'm going to start serving God. I don't know what your answers to those questions are, but I hope you'll take some time today and think about that. I hope that this week, as you go through your week, you'll come back to these questions and ask yourself, what do I need to leave in the grave? What do I need to stop serving? And that in that process, you will begin to discover that serving God is so much better than serving the old life. That serving the one that saved you is so much better than serving what holds you back. So I hope you'll do that this week.